There is a vicious war on womanhood happening right now, and I think that we should understand how this war started and where it could possibly end up, should it remain unabated. Now, there may be some of you who hear what I'm saying and look at this video and ask yourself, well, why is a male speaking on this topic? And if your initial reaction is that question, then you should really listen on in this video, because this video is especially for you. So, my friends, there is certainly a war on womanhood. Now, this thesis may be rejected by people who may say, oh, there is no war on womanhood, but the empirical evidence bears it out. Women are now being called birthing persons, not simply by woke activists on the street who have no power, but by institutions of higher education, such as Harvard University, by the government itself. The Biden administration, in fact, released a guidance not too long ago calling women, or negating the word woman and replacing it with birthing persons in the name of inclusivity. Not only that, but a quick Google search about gender and the connection between sex and gender will yield articles from major news sites and scientific organizations saying there is no connection between biological sex and gender, and you cannot weigh if someone is a woman on the basis of their sex. And the emergence of ideas and concepts like being non-binary, like being transgender, so to speak, as a full phenomenon of the self, as opposed to just mere identification. I'll get to that in a second. All of these things have said that womanhood either does not exist, or it is a transient quality of someone that can be amended and is a reflection of social ideas and social constructs. Now, it should not have to be said that womanhood is real, that being a woman actually correlates to physical reality. But for those of you who do not think that it does, there is a sea of evidence that fortifies this point. And I won't spend too much time on this point, because I think it's just common sense. But amongst the sea of evidence that fortifies that womanhood is real, in the sense that it is connected to biological sex, there is an article from a peer-reviewed medical journal that argues just this. And it argues that the differences between the male brain and the female brain, yes, those two things exist, actually certify that, again, there are men and women. The article says the following: the gonads of men and women function differently because of differences in the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the gonad axis. These brain regions look morphologically exactly the same. The hormones excreted are exactly the same, just the patterns of secretion are different. The future effects of highly elevated testosterone in the male fetus are numerous, including behavioral characteristics, toy preferences, verbality, and many other features. Now, this author goes on to say that there are other regions of the body that are connected to the brain that also confirm a distinct male or female character. For example, in the heart, the author says the following: consider the heart, which is morphologically indistinguishable between the sexes. However, more women than men who suffer from a heart attack will have open coronary arteries and atypical symptoms. Consider drugs. Prophylactic aspirin taken by women will more often prevent strokes, and if taken by men, will more often prevent heart attacks. There are functional differences in the body between men and women, and this is borne out by years of empirical evidence, and to deny this is to simply deny reality. But the truth is, the sort of anti-woman cult that has arisen in modern society in the West doesn't care about reality, because their ideological presuppositions reject the idea that we can even know what reality is. This is the core of the war on women, my friends. The war on women is not merely a war against women, it is also a war against reason and a war against society. Follow with me here. Society, my friends, is simply the composite sum, the grand total of all of its members. And society manifests in different levels. A lot of folks treat society as if it's this grand organism that can be understood by a single method. But in fact, society can be just as simple and personal as me and you sharing a dialogue through the internet. As you watching this video and commenting on the video angrily or with love, hopefully with love. It can be as simple as you writing a letter to the mayor, as you going to the store. Society exists on the most basic level of human interaction. Men and women comprise society. They are units of society. When you can begin to reject the existence or the sort of concrete reality of womanhood or manhood, for that example, you can also begin to reject certain fundamental ideals about what society is. And if you reject certain fundamental ideals about what society is, society as it's properly designed to exist can no longer exist. And chaos will ensue. Whether that's civilizational chaos, conceptual chaos, chaos of the mind is a much stronger force than I think political chaos. Political chaos is transient, but chaos of the mind can perpetuate throughout generations and cause problems down the line. If you don't believe me, well, then just look at how academia is today. Just look at how Americans do their politics today. Look at how they view certain actions by the government today. Americans have largely been propagandized by the government in many different ways to see certain things differently. Look at World War II and you'll see how FDR took over almost all of the entertainment industry and used them to propagate the war effort, used them to justify rationing, which is the sort of immoral government takeover of resources that free men have and appropriating them to their own ends. It's a very deep rabbit hole that I cannot cover in this video, but it exists. Now, if we've accepted that society is a bunch of interpersonal interactions happening together, and men and women constitute society, and there are fundamental principles connected to them that constitute a properly designed society, we have to ask ourselves, okay, how does the war on women exactly threaten society specifically? Well, to understand that, we have to understand how womanhood has been seen throughout the ages. I like to go back particularly to the feminist movements. The feminist movements, for those of you who don't know, were women asserting their ideas about themselves during particular periods in response to particular things. During the first wave feminist movement, women were particularly agitating for legal rights. Susan B. Anthony, the sort of quote-unquote right to vote, things of that sort. That was the ethos of women during that wave. Then in the second wave of feminism, you have more radical thought coming into what a woman is, and more radical thought coming into the social position of a woman. You have this very dominant idea that the personal is political, which simply meant that politics is not merely a bunch of processes happening in a government, but it also occurs on a basic social level. So the family itself, due to the patriarchy, is inherently political. This is what second wave feminists believe. And you have women liberations thought coming into this, and you begin to see a real radical transformation. But both first wave feminism and second wave feminism presuppose one thing. They both presuppose the concrete existence of the term women. You don't have the first women's liberation movement. You don't have the second wave feminist movement without having a concrete idea of what a woman is. Only until the 90s, when the third wave, which some would say is the wave we're going through right now, others would say that it's not, comes around, do we even have this question of what it means to be a woman? And in my opinion, you can connect this directly to the entry of postmodern ideas, which had been brewing in the 60s and had really come alive in academia in the 90s, into the conversation, and the prevalence of authors like Judith Butler, who have also come into the conversation. During the 90s, Judith Butler, who is a sort of feminist, postmodernist philosopher, one of the most revolutionary and most cited and popular defenders of quote-unquote third-wave feminism that exists right now, that is still alive, she wrote a book called Gender Troubles. And in this book, she wants to, in her words, reevaluate the category of a woman. Now, quite recently, she did an interview with The Guardian in response to the rise of the trans movement and the rise of this idea that women themselves are transient, that the condition of being a woman is simply a transient condition that can change and be blown away. And so, she says the following about this. She says in the interview with The Guardian that Gender Troubles was meant to be a critique of heterosexual assumptions within feminism, but it turned out to be more about gender categories. For instance, what it means to be a woman does not remain the same from decade to decade. The category of woman can and does change, and we need it to be that way. Politically, securing greater freedoms for women requires that we rethink the category of woman to include new possibilities. The historical meaning of gender can change as its norms are reenacted, refused, and recreated. So we should not be surprised, she goes on to say, or opposed when the category of women expands to include trans women. And since we are in the business of imagining alternate futures to masculinity, we should be prepared and even joyous to see what trans men are doing with the category of men. Butler is the thought leader, or one of them at least, behind the recent radical transformations in how we think about gender and sex that have marked the beginning of the war on concrete womanhood. So to understand the war on womanhood, to understand the postmodern frame, this idea that being a woman is subjective, it's merely a category, we have to also understand where this idea comes from. So Judith Butler is influenced by a French psychoanalyst called Jacques Lacan, probably butchering his name. And Jacques Lacan had this concept that no one in society can actually see outside of society. His idea was that society is so surrounded by constructs that breed ideas, that breed habits, that breed values, that all of it is just a bunch of socially constructed stuff. And Butler took that idea to mean that since a lot of ideas and values are socially constructed, they can therefore be recreated or they can be changed by other people who wish to construct them differently. So whenever you hear that gender is a social construct, what those people are actually saying, they're saying that this idea that we have about womanhood or manhood are subjective ideals created by people who wield power, and when I take back the power, I can therefore change these ideals. Now, the problem with the war on woman, the problem with this sort of idea that being a woman is a subjective, transient thing is very simple. If I can prove to you that I can connect with reality, that I can, through my use of reason, understand the distinctions between men and women, if I can prove that to you and demonstrate that to you empirically, then the claim that everything is a product of social construction falls apart. Also, the idea that everything is a product of social construction is what we call a reductionist idea, a simplified view of reality. And this simplified view of reality doesn't take into account the fact that social constructions, or whatever, society itself is formed off of fundamental principles. And these fundamental principles can be verified as universal and thus in an objective way. The fundamental principle, for example, of human interaction has been endemic to every prosperous society that we have seen. And the principle of human conflict has been almost its sure destruction. Of course, in societies, there are different levels of conflict. But when man is at war with each other, at enmity with each other, society cannot happen. Commerce cannot happen. Collaboration cannot happen because all of his energy is being soaked up into the war machine. Which is one of the reasons why the military-industrial complex is the greatest antisocial force in modern-day society. But that's a different story. And so, if we accept that there are fundamental principles that aren't socially constructed, that we can actually look at outside of society, then we can also accept that there are also fundamental qualities about us that are not socially constructed that we can verify outside of society. But the postmodernist idea reduces everything to power and privilege. The postmodernist idea reduces everything to social structures. The postmodernist idea has no conception of being able to see outside of society. It is short-sighted. And plus, as I mentioned, its idea of society is that society is simply power relationships. Whoever has the power leads society. Whoever has the power drives society. And yet, this has been disproven time and time and time again. Revolutions throughout history, whether it be the American Revolution or the French Revolution, have occurred when about 20% or less than that of society said enough. People who don't hold power, people who don't hold any sort of significance, common folks who inhabit society say enough. Because when you disrupt the interpersonal relationship in society and you then redirect your energy toward a different end, the social dynamic changes and things happen. Society is ultimately within the soul of the individual. And yet, the war on womanhood assumes that it's not. My friends, the war on womanhood is fundamentally a postmodern attempt to transform our understanding of reality, to put an illusory cloak over our eyes, to pull wool over our eyes so that we don't understand the true nature of all of these things. Some of the concepts I discussed may be alien to you, and some of them may be not. But if there's one thing you take from this video, let it be this. Womanhood is a concrete reality. It is not a social construct. It is informed by social ideas, sure, but it can be verified outside of that. We have instances of feminine behavior in women, or rather female-type creatures in nature, that transcend all understanding, and in a way reflect analogous behavior to women in society. We have all kinds of examples. We can't reduce everything to society. The danger about the war on women is not just that it's irrational or that it blocks us from the truth. The real danger is that it convinces everybody who so pleases that they have the ability to create their own world, to believe whatever they want, and if anyone tries to interrupt that or question that, they are erasing them or erasing their existence. When in all reality, they have already erased the fundamental truths of the situation by willfully ignoring them. The ideas of Judith Butler and her friends should be rejected quite thoroughly. And every category, whether it be non-binary, whether it be this mythical understanding of transgenderism, should also be rejected. That's not to say that people can't be transgender. There are transgender folks who understand that they are not biological women. People like Blair White who understand that. That's fine. But the moment you begin saying that womanhood is transient and you can therefore decide if you're a woman or a man, that's the moment you go athwart all reason. And that's the moment you begin posing a serious threat to the existence of womanhood and, by consequence, the existence of women and, by consequence, the existence of society. Reject those notions and embrace truth, my friends. I love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.